Ladies, gentlemen and all variations thereupon, Mother's Day is almost upon us, or at least it is in Britain. And I have this notion that for Mother's Day I was going to create a cushion cover, an embroidered cushion cover for my mum. And I was going to put on the embroidery set of roses with each part symbolising a different part of the family with names across it, going from my grandparents up to her first grandchild. Only thing is, that's quite a complicated pattern. And I've never embroidered anything before, which means this can either be an epic win and an easy beginner's project for you to follow along with if you've never embroidered anything before, or it's going to be a massive fail and you're going to get to see me do it. Either way, we'll know. So without further ado, without me constantly talking on and on and on and on and on and on, let's move over to the crafting cave.
Part 1. The fabric. So the first thing we're going to do here is fold a piece of fabric in half so we've got two even sides. And incidentally, I'm going to be doing voiceovers for all of this because our neighbours decided at this moment in time that it would be great to have a disco in the room that has a wall adjoining my craft room. So we're going to pin the fabric together just so it doesn't slip and move around, and I've got a cushion cover of the size I want and I'm going to use that as my template for marking out the cushion. I'll leave the measurements in the description however. And now we're just going to cut it out. The material I have here is an ordinary cotton, but if you're going to use a cushion on a settee or something that you're going to continually sit on, you're probably going to want a strong material just so that buttons and zips don't catch it and tear it. Because the material is folded, you can just use the fold as an easy way to cut a straight line. Now on one of the sides of the cushion we're only going to cut through one layer of the fabric. This is because we want one side to be slightly longer than the other in order to create an overlap on the envelope at the back. I'm going about 5 centimeters or 2 inches beyond where I've already marked. Now we fold the longer piece in half and cut it along the fold, which gives us 2 smaller back pieces and 1 large front piece, which is the piece we're going to embroider, and that is the next step. Part 2, the embroidery. The first part of any good embroidery is to sketch on the design. I like also to add a little shading, as with more detail tends to come a better end result. Next we need to pull the fabric taut within the embroidery hoop. Now because this is such a big embroidery, we're going to be doing it in sections, so I'm going to start out with the roots, just putting the hoop behind and pressing the outer hoop over the top and tightening it in place. Now we're going to start from the back of the embroidery hoop by pressing the needle through to a point where we want the cotton to show through, and you'll notice here that the cotton is doubled up to make it a bit thicker. And rather than tying a knot, what we're going to do is place our finger on the thread as it pulls through so that it doesn't go all the way through, and then we're going to hold it in place whilst we do the first few stitches. If you're not able to hold it down or you just don't want to, then what you can do is do a few quick stitches over a short area, being careful not to pull it through, and then that will create enough friction so that the thread won't pull all the way through when you do your main stitches. Now for the roots, what we're going to do is a feather stitch, whereby you place your needle into the front of the fabric and then quickly pass it out again, but behind where the thread already is. And then as you pull your needle through, the thread that was there previously will catch onto the new thread, and you'll end up with 2 lines of fabric that look rather like either the hairs of a feather or the roots of a plant. If you're struggling to follow along with the particular embroideries, then don't worry, because I'm going to show the embroidery techniques in more detail in the series of shorts later on. Once the root's done, we're going to move on to the fill, which is a lot simpler stitch. It's just a case of coming out of one area, moving across the top and going into the other area. What I'm trying to silently show here is that if you go in and then out on the same side before crossing over, then going in, then out on the same side, you can ensure that you use the minimum amount of thread, as you're not having to continually cross over the back as well as the front, as you're not going to see the back anyway. It doesn't really matter. The irony is, after I showed this, I actually broke the rule and crossed straight over by accident, but it doesn't matter. I've got plenty of thread and thread comes cheap, but if you find yourself struggling with the amount of thread that you've got, keep that in mind. Go in, out, crossover, in, out, crossover. Move the hoop along when needed and then just continue embroidering all along the length. When it comes to the flower petals, we're not going to do an infill for the petals themselves, we're just going to outline them. To do this, we're going to do a back stitch. We begin as we normally do by just holding the back of the thread and making a few stitches until there's enough friction so that the thread doesn't come all the way through. But for a back stitch, we're going to come out from the back to the front, move a longer distance and go back in from the front to the back. Then when we come back through from the back to the front, we're going to backtrack and come back out where we've already constructed a bit of the line. Then we're going to go a bit further along in our design and go in again. This ensures that we have one continual solid thread going all the way along the outside with no gaps. If you want a very tight curve in your design, then you want to make lots of small stitches. If you're covering a long straight area, then you can afford to go a long distance over the top and make a small back stitch. So let's go over the points that make a good embroidery. Firstly, we need to carefully draw out the design that we want and consider all of the details that we want to add from the very beginning. Secondly, we need to consider what sort of stitch we're going to use to create the design. This enables us to have a good idea of what we're going to do going forward before we even put the stitch into the fabric. Finally, we need to know when to stop. For example, when I was doing the petals, my first intention was to outline in a darker colour and then fill in with a lighter colour. But after I outlined the petals, I noticed I didn't need to add anything else in order to make it look good. It's important, therefore, to recognise when less is more. Part 3, or C, or possibly those 3 little eyes you get in footnotes, the assembly of the cushion. Our first task in the assembly phase is going to be to hem up the openings of the cushion. Now, one hem is going to be larger than the other, and the reason for that is the 2 back pieces are the same size at the moment, but by making one hem slightly larger than the other, we can reduce the size of one so there is a slight overlap rather than a massive one. And to give our cushion cover a professional look, we're going to make sure that we press our hems before sewing. As always, we begin the sewing by going forward a little and then back just to lock in the stitches, and we're going to use a straight stitch just to run along the side of the hem. Although one line of stitches would be enough, I'm going to put a second straight stitch in just to give it a more finished and professional look. And with both of the hems complete, what we need to do now is actually assemble the cushion. Now we need to make sure that we put the right sides together, so the parts that we want on the outside of the cushion need to be on the inside when we assemble it. Once pinned, we just simply sew with a straight stitch around the edges, going forward first, then back, then forward again. Make sure you sew over the edges of the opening so nothing falls apart. And when you get to the end, what you need to do is make sure your needle is all the way down, lift up the foot, pull the fabric from underneath the camera, and then rotate the fabric around. Put the foot back down and start again. Once we've gone all the way around with a straight stitch, we're going to stop, switch the machine over to a zigzag stitch, and then stitch around the outside again to the outside of where we've already sewn the straight stitch. We do this so that when we wash it, it doesn't fray too much and we don't lose too much fabric on the inside. Finally, we just turn the cushion inside out again so that we can see our lovely embroidery. And we're done.
So there we have it, and I think this has actually turned out quite well. Considering this was my first attempt, I could have done a little bit better with the writing perhaps, because some of it, unless you know what it says, you might get mixed up with some of the letters, but a lot of it is legible. I think I particularly like the way the roses turned out at the top. So embroidery is a lot easier than I originally thought it was. So if you've never embroidered anything before, your materials are fairly cheap, you could pick something up and give it a go. So if you're interested in embroidery, coming up I'm going to create a series of videos on different types of stitching that you can use in embroidery. I never embroidered before, but I like hand sewing. I wouldn't say I'm brilliant at it, but I quite like it. So I know different techniques for stitching, which is probably what helped me doing this. But anyway, coming up I'm going to be showing how each type of stitch is done. So if you want to learn, stick around. They're going to be a series of shorts, not more than a minute long. So subscribe if you want to see how they're done.